has reaffirmed its stance on the December 1 ultimatum given to governors who failed to implement the new minimum wage by the end of November this year. The NLC had initially set a deadline for state governments to implement the new minimum wage, which increased from 30,000 naira to 70,000 naira in July of 2024. While over 20 states have announced that they will implement the new minimum wage, several others are yet to comply. The NLC has directed state councils where the new minimum wage is not yet implemented to commence an indefinite strike starting December 1, 2024. This action underscores the NLC's commitment to holding state governors accountable for the implementation of the new minimum wage and ensuring the welfare of workers. That's our next conversation right here on TVC Breakfast. So to talk about this, we have a strategic consultant to lend his voice to this conversation, Dipo Oyewole. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Right. So, of course, the story has since, developed further. About 32 states have been, said to have, kick-started processes to implement the new minimum wage in their respective domains. The presidency has also expressed delight at the pace with which state governments, took it further, so to speak. So we have only about 4 states. Ebonyi State is one of them. But, generally speaking, as a way to initiate this conversation, what do you think, about the true implementation of the new national minimum wage?
Okay, well, I believe it should be done without hesitation, especially at a time like now, because the cost of living has gone up astronomically. It's almost been going up like every other month. It's gone up like 100% in the last 12 to 18 months. And a lot of people need to find ways to adjust and cope, and they've been doing that. And saying that the minimum wage is still a conversation to be danced around in certain states by now is unacceptable, given what we were put through with the NLC when they were trying to negotiate it with the federal government, shutting down the power grid and all of that. So I believe right now it's unacceptable after all this time for certain states to still be dilly-dallying around the conversation, because as far as I'm concerned, they don't have any excuse to not implement it. So I believe that in this regard, I would support whatever action the NLC wants to take in those particular states. And it's also good to see that, right now the NLC is then holding the governors to account. So it's not an issue of, okay, some governors are not performing and then everything, you're always going to Abuja, you're always going to the federal government, and then everyone's getting to suffer for it nationally, which is what we had been seeing in time past. Because there are certain states around Nigeria where the minimum wage has always been speedily implemented, but the national actions they take always affect those states. And then we're always asking, what is going on? So what's the point, or what's the reward for doing the right thing when we're still suffering the consequences with those that didn't do it at all?
Because they have to comply.
Yes, so focus on the governors. Everything is not about the federal government. So this is a step in the right direction.
But there are concerns about the fact that some states, maybe from those 4 states, are not financially viable and still have to go to the federal government cap in hand for allocations and all of that. Do you think NLC will just have to maybe go to these governments and negotiate with them as well?
No, I don't see them doing that, and I don't think that'll be a step in the right direction, because you cannot have 32 out of 36 states implementing it and then you're having to negotiate it down with the other 4 states. That doesn't work that way, because then what is the incentive for the other states that are doing it already or have chosen to do it? The next time you're choosing to adjust the minimum wage, they won't answer you. It's just common negotiation tactic. Nobody's going to answer you, and nobody's going to take it seriously. So I believe that they should put the hammer down on those governors. And the question around if maybe they have enough money or revenue in their coffers, it's a very flimsy excuse. It's a very flimsy excuse, because if you look at the lifestyle of the public officials in those states, then you'd know that it's a flimsy excuse. So if it requires that they need to cut down the cost of the government statewide, they should do so. But they should find a way to be able to implement the minimum wage, because in the end, it still comes back to the conversation around productivity. Because if you are telling me that what you're generating internally can't even cater for for the people in your states to cover their salaries, then what are you doing exactly? So that means you are mostly just depending on FAC.
Okay, so with this, you earlier mentioned about the fact that the cost of living has increased daily. With the increase in the minimum wage, some states are paying 70, 75, some others are paying 80,
yes,
and all of that. Different prices at that, different amount per state. Do you think it's even enough?
It's somewhere to start from.
Okay.
Somewhere to start from. Because in the end, how much will really be enough? Okay, if we're being practical about it, how much will really be enough? And but I believe it's a starting point. And if we also cast a mind back that it took a lot of negotiation to get to this particular point where everybody on all sides had to squeeze in one thing or the other to see how they could negotiate it. So I believe that they should let this particular point of negotiation run out for some time before we're having a conversation around renegotiating it again to see how it can be increased. Because, I mean, it's just a couple of months ago that they agreed to this one. You can't go back to the table and say, okay, you know what, because the whole thing has gone up again, we also need to take it up again. Federal government, nobody's even going to answer you, okay? And that's really not operating in good faith. However, aside from the fact that it's pegged at 70,000, is really just literally the minimum. So it doesn't mean you have to pay 70,000, which also applies to states as well. There's certain states that they are saying they're not even paying the 70,000. They're paying a little bit more than the 70,000. So why can't we have that done? We have employers too who also have to consider that as an option. So it's not necessarily saying that, oh, 70,000 has to be 70,000 without a naira on top of it. So
right. And talking about the mass engagement, you know, in the advocacy for a new national minimum wage, as you have said, now it was you know, a wide, it was expansive.
Yes.
The president, the NLC, the Governors Forum was also very vocal at the time before they too also endorsed and modified it. So perhaps it may also help in what you have already assessed. It may also strengthen your assessment so far, but it's actually a question as to the justification for the challenges of these four governors of this, Katsina, Cross Rivers, Zamfara, and Imo, who may just face, you know, the mother of all battles, as the Labour has called it, in their inability to implement the new national minimum wage. If there were any issues that should have been sorted out at the NGF stage.
So let's even now assume, which I don't believe is the case, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that these four governors of these four states, at the time of the conversation, said categorically that we would not be able to pay, right? And the others that have said we can afford it or we can look for a way around it, assented to it. Are you telling me that in the last couple of months they hadn't been able to make any form of arrangement whatsoever to get it implemented? Is that what you're telling me? That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable because this was an agreement and it's something that is supposed to be implemented nationwide. They weren't informed last week. This agreement was not reached last month. It's been a couple of months. So what arrangements have been put in place to ensure that, you know what, let's even say by December, because we're going to the Yuletide season, prices are going to go up. People need money because in the end, some people collect their salaries on the 16th of December. Before 25th, the whole thing is gone, and then January is like 70 days. So what is really going on? Because then if you then take some numbers from these particular states where the governors are making all these flimsy excuses, because for me it's very offensive, where you then have a lot of money spent between the time the agreement was reached with the NLC up until now. If you take stock of how much has been spent to run the government, you'd be alarmed. We don't need to have that particular number now, but I would like someone out there to go find those numbers for us and help us publish it. You would be alarmed because then you'd know that all of these are flimsy excuses and they're really not acceptable. So for me, the fact that by now they haven't been able to adequately prepare to have it implemented means that they're really not interested in implementing it, and there should be consequences.
Right, and then you talk of, you know, they ought to have devised strategies to, you know, come up with something.
Yes.
And For a state governor now, in these 4 states, what options are you looking at? And you've spoken about cost of governance. To break that theory down, are you also looking in the light of job losses? And for many observers, that would be political suicidal.
So not necessarily for job losses, but how much does it cost to run the executive branch of a state? How much does it cost? The parliamentary side of the states, the state assemblies, how much do they cost the state? These are things that, and I think this is a good time to have these conversations around cost and cost of governance across the nation. But let's focus on these 4 governors and let us use them as a model that we can look to spread across the entire nation. Because in the end, we've always had this conversation around the reasons why the cost of running our government in Nigeria is so expensive. There's no reason why it should be so expensive, also given to the fact that the productivity doesn't even tally with the cost at which we are running it. So what are we then really spending money on? So we need right now, you should look at, so if they're not, so for me, if they're not creative enough, all right, and they're not enthusiastic enough to look at ways to boost productivity within their systems to see how to generate more revenue, then they should first look at cutting the cost of governance. When they cut that one first, then I believe that they say necessity is the mother of invention. Okay, so maybe when they've been able to cut that, and then there are certain things that they're having to be a little bit uncomfortable with, they'll be able to think back and put their team together to say, okay, you know what, I think we need to look at this particular area to see how we can generate revenue. Because I think maybe they're getting too comfortable in their offices. Because in the end, you also have people who are being paid enormous amount of money. And what are they really contributing to the system? Because after months and months, I'll reiterate it again, you haven't been able to come up with sound reasons and strategies as to how to bridge this particular gap of the increment. So what are you really then doing? So excuses, because right now, if you condone any excuse from them now, this excuse will go into Q1 of 2025. They'll drag it on into Q2. So for me personally, I think that the NLC should go at them, and they should go at them hard.
You don't see it.
Yeah, what would this strike portend? What will it do?
Absolutely.
Because there are some states who could not even pay the 30,000 naira example. Zamfara State.
Yes.
In 2019, couldn't pay the 30,000 naira minimum wage. And you expect that the strike will suddenly make them change their minds and ensure that they pay the 70,000 naira minimum wage?
So this is it. 2 things here. The fact that they didn't pay it doesn't mean that they lacked the actual capacity to pay it. So there is, I'll give an example, all right? So you have a phone on there, and I say, okay, maybe there's no network on my phone. My phone isn't here with me. You have a phone there. I want to make a call with your phone. The fact that I don't have access to your phone is one of 2 things. It's either your phone is also drained, which you do not have the capacity to help me, or you actually don't want to help me. That's what we're running with here. I have the personal opinion, right, that if they are serious about it, they will actually get this done. And I was going to reference Zamfara State because this entire 30,000 conversation still bled into when they were having this conversation around even increasing to 70,000, which for me, I think, is nonsensical because this 30,000 conversation was years ago. So how are we still having 30,000 naira conversation in 2024? And somehow, so and they were a sound idea, sound example.
So you are looking at it from the point of view of the state of the naira then and now?
Oh no, not even getting to that yet. It's saying that there's, I believe, my personal opinion, that there is no sense of urgency for these governors to see how they want to implement it, which for me I think it is cruel because a sound example now with Zamfara State, 30,000 a couple of years ago was agreed upon. Several states have paid 30,000. Several states have paid more than 30,000 over the years. Up until 2024, you are still struggling to pay that 30,000. Again, what have you been doing all along that you did not make adequate provision to say, okay, you know what, even if it is by a 5% increment every month, we'll do something about it to ensure that these people get what their due is. So that's why I then said, if you let these guys slide with the excuse they're making, whatever it is, which for me it is still not good enough, with this 70,000 naira, they will keep making those excuses, and it will be unacceptable.
But there are many people who say NLC is just all talk and no bite.
Okay, well, it will be left to them to see how they either confirm that particular statement, or they treat it, or they let us see it as a rumor or as a fallacy. Because, again, the reason why we have a lot of things the way they are in this country is because there are no consequences for bad behavior.
Right.
So when you have these 4 states, or the 4 governors of these states just go scot-free with this kind of behavior, what is then the incentive for the other ones that have chosen to do the right thing? Because how justice really works, right, isn't about just punishing bad behavior. We also have to reward good behavior.
Okay. Are we looking at, NLC through the same eyes as we saw them during the threat, and even when they embarked on a general strike, a national strike, now that they want to embark on strikes in singling out 4 states, in terms of impact, all talk and no bite conversation, in terms of impact, do you foresee that it will not be a counterproductive action if they do embark on a strike?
If they learned any lessons from the one they did nationwide, if they believed that whatever actions they took at the time led to them getting the results they got, if this was the result they got, if this was the results they wanted in the first place, I think that they should then see how to replicate it in these 4 states, if they're serious about it. Because if their state chapters aren't as strong enough to get those results, can't they mobilize their other folks at national level to come give them backup? I mean, it's just 4 states,
absolutely,
right? So they should be able to see how to mobilize their members nationwide to come give them backup. But either way, it must be implemented and it must be done.
Quick one, though. We're talking about national minimum wage, which is not exactly one that particularly affects the majority of Nigerians. And experts in the papers this morning are saying the minimum wage hike will further strain fiscal imbalance. It must be matched by corresponding revenue growth.
Yes.
Is that how you see it too?
Yes, it is, because, there was also, this conversation happened when the negotiations were going on. That, okay, you increase minimum wage to 70,000, then price of goods go up, and then you need to make more money to be able to match up with the price differences and all of that. So yes, those are practical realities. But let's not make it a chicken or the egg situation, right? This has been agreed upon. They should implement it, and then we'll take it from there, okay? Because in the end, we keep going back to these conversations, which I really understand because of the long-term impacts of it. But if we're being fair, and like I say sometimes, if we're trying not to be elitist, as some people will say, that let us have it implemented nationwide, let us see what the consequences are, and we take it from there. Right. Because some people will tell you that, okay, you know what, maybe 30,000 naira is even enough for some people in Zamfara State. But should that be the conversation now? Because their counterparts in other states are earning a lot more than that. Right. Is somebody in another part of Nigeria more Nigerian than the people in Zamfara State? That's not the case, and that's not what we want people to see, or that's not what we want them to perceive.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for. Dipo Oyiwole, strategic consultant, we thank you very much for your time with us.
Thank you for having me.